Welcome to Brave with Lisa. This space is designed to inspire, champion, and equip you to bravely walk in that unique rhythm of grace and calling that God has designed just for you. I'm so excited you're joining us today. Welcome to Brave with Lisa. My name's Lisa Bruton, and today I have the extraordinary and beautiful Grethe Stanley with me. I've known Grethe lightly over the years. We've crossed paths, but every time I get to spend time with her, I walk away that much richer. So welcome, Grethe.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a privilege to be here with you this morning.
Oh, it's so great to have you. Grethe, would you be able to share with us what your world looks like now, and then something that you're really passionate about?
Well, the way my world looks right now, I'm actually in a season of grief, if you like, because I lost my husband 18 months ago. So I'm still processing that. Mm-hmm. Andrew and I, we have got a lot of we've done everything together over the years, and Andrew was actually the one that introduced me to Jesus way back 45 odd years ago. So I'm trying to adjust to that, and it's been a real learning curve because I didn't realize how much confidence he gave me. But anyway, I don't want to dwell on that. I'm doing okay.
Oh, that's good to hear. And yeah, isn't that incredible when God gives us when you have such a beautiful husband to do life with? And you and Andrew really have done some incredible things, and we were just chatting about it before we hopped on, and we were lightly covering your time when you spent time in Eastern Europe from 2004 to 2012, and you were saying it was actually a really tough time of your life. Would you mind sharing about that?
Sure, I'd love to share about that, but I just want to go back a little bit further. When Andrew and I became believers way back in 1980, I think it was, it transformed our lives. We went from this to that overnight.
Wow.
And we made a promise to God that we would go anywhere, anytime, anyhow. And so God took us at our word, because I think about 3 months after we made that commitment, we ended up in New Zealand with our 5 kids, and we were working with an organization called Youth with a Mission for 5 years.
Wow.
And so that was the start of our journey. And throughout all these years, every now and again we would get a piece of paper and we would put the date on it, just a blank piece of paper, and we would sign it on the bottom, and we'd hold it up to God and we'd say, Lord, this represents the rest of our lives. We're still willing to go and to do whatever. And so again, he's taken us at our word, because back in 2000, and I won't go into the details of that, but we had been in business and we lost the business, which brought us to the Sunshine Coast. Right. And when we were fighting for our business, we also made a decision that if we lost it, we would take it as God being God's best for us. And we moved to Queensland. And God had a plan that we could not have foreseen way back then. We went on a trip after we lost the business, our married son in England, he wanted us to come over and visit. So he paid for us to go to England. And he also, my late husband is from former Yugoslavia, which is Eastern Europe. And he wanted to show me where he used to live. Mm. And so we went for a holiday to my son's, and then we went to Croatia, which is where he used to live. And the hotel we were staying in, I opened the window the next morning and I said, wow, this is beautiful. I could live here. And while we were only there for a few days, but God had already begun to nudge us about would we be willing to come to former Yugoslavia. Mm-hmm. So we thought when we get home and get back into our normal living again, it's just all going to go away. But of course it didn't. So long story short, we ended up in October 2004, we packed up everything. And I just want to mention, my husband was 71 at that time.
Oh, wow.
And I'm in my 70s now. And when I think back to, how brave, we just packed up everything and took our cat. We took our cat and our clothes and we went to Eastern Europe. I had no idea about the history of
Mm.
that part of the world. But Andrew, of course, being from there, he was very passionate because when he lived there, it was Yugoslavia. But because of war, and I won't go into all that either, there was a lot of hatred. And
Yeah.
we went over there with the purpose of bringing reconciliation between the states of former Yugoslavia, which is Croatia, Slovenia, Macedonia, Serbia. And I thought I was just going there to support Andrew in that ministry. But God had another plan, because he had whispered to me before I went over. I was at a colour conference in Sydney, and it was the last session, and God had whispered to me, I want you to take this conference over to the Balkans.
Mm.
If you had known me then, Lisa, me, me, are you sure, God, are you sure? But I knew if I didn't speak it out to someone, I would just reason it away.
Yeah.
Because if you don't speak it out, you just reason it away. And I definitely would have done that. So when we had not been over there for very long, and I realized how downtrodden the women were in that part of the world. And would you believe, in 2004, there was not a Bible study, there was not a ladies' breakfast, there was not a women's conference, there was nothing in former Yugoslavia. So
Wow.
then I could see why God had said, I want you to take this conference to not
Yeah.
literally take colour, but to start something over there for women. And that was no easy thing. It's the hardest thing I've ever been involved in, but it's the most fulfilling thing I've ever been involved in. So I don't know whether you want me to keep going down that track.
Yes, please. I would love to hear more about this.
Well, I just need to also go back to in 2007, I had the first conference. In 2006, Andrew organised a reconciliation gathering between the evangelical leaders of former Yugoslavia. And so something broke in the spiritual realm at that particular retreat, because we didn't have a program. We just knew we wanted to bring these people together, and the Holy Spirit did the rest. And to make a very long story short, we saw on the Sunday, well, actually through the couple of days, we saw people first getting right with God.
Wow.
And then we saw them going to each other to get right with God. And then on the Sunday morning, we knew that there had to be communion. So we set the communion out, and then we just started to worship. And then suddenly a Croatian pastor, he went up and he went to a Serbian pastor and asked for forgiveness on behalf of his nation. And, and that we just sat back and we just watched God do a miracle. And something broke in the spiritual realm after that. And, this is why I have so much admiration for my late husband, because for the first 2 years, he drove around all of former Yugoslavia sharing that vision of reconciliation. And God led him to a particular generation, the generation between 35 and 45, because he didn't lead us, our generation were too set in their ways. They're not willing to forgive, but the younger generation could see that they would never move forward if they didn't reconcile. And, I could keep you here for days telling you what that did in those nations. But I want to now go back to the women's conference. So here we are in a country where there's nothing for women. And I knew I had to have a team, but these women didn't know how to work in a team.
Yeah.
They were always in the kitchen. They were always, second-class citizens. They cleaned the church. They taught Sunday school, but there was nothing for them. So, and nothing can happen over there unless it comes through the men. So I couldn't decide to have a conference. I had to wait for the men to get to know me, to trust me. And it was after that reconciliation gathering that God opened the door for me to have a women's conference. And I didn't have a lot of faith at that time of what it was going to look like, because who am I? How do you run a conference? I don't know. But anyway, we hired a little venue that took 70 women, and we had to turn them away. because
Wow.
we only had bed, you know, they could only have 70 beds. So it was only a small centre. And it was just amazing what happened at this conference. Now, I had to find the money for it, and I had to find the team for it, and I won't go into all that. But on the last day of that conference, I was going to speak. I was going to take the last session, and during the worship, I just started crying. I just couldn't. And my speaker that I had there, she thought, "Oh my goodness, I better get a message from God because Greta's lost it." Won't be able to speak, but what she didn't realize is that God was speaking to me during the worship. I could actually see that his blood was falling on the ground and cleaning away all that hatred, all that blood, all that bad, you know. And he showed me very clearly what I should do. And it was simply that, so our first, there's nothing professional about what I do, I just do it. And he showed me that I needed to call out a woman from each one of the nations of former Yugoslavia and to get them to stand under the banner of God. We had a gold banner, stand under that. And I was to ask them to call out the women in their nations, to call them forth. And I need, you know, I need to share that because I think it was significant, because these women had never, you know, they just trusted me and they just did it so simply. You know, there was no fanfare, there was no, they trusted me, and so they called forth the women from their nations. And from there we grew. The next year we had 250 and we're still turning them away. And so it just grew year after year until we got to about 700. And it, you know, I could tell you so many stories. I could tell you so many stories of, now these women today are unstoppable. They're unstoppable. Today they have women's breakfasts. They have they've started pro-life centers. They, you know, they're incredible, absolutely incredible.
Wow, isn't that that's such a powerful story? And from saying yes to God and not knowing how he was going to do it, but saying, okay, yes, and I'm going to speak it out, and I've got to tell someone or else I'll rationalize it out. And just beginning with what's in your hand. And I can imagine that there were miracles in just how the finances came the first time, and the team, and all of that. But the beauty of reconciliation is just standing out so loudly about this, what you're sharing right now. And I think that's something that God's doing right now as well. He's done it in my life. Like, I've just reconciled very powerfully with someone who, you know, for 16 odd years we weren't speaking, and it's such a miracle as to what God's done. And so even right now, I just want to give space to people who are listening in to go, well, Lord, is there someone in my life or something in my life you want to bring reconciliation to and healing in a relationship, and just handing that to him right now, because he is really, I really believe this is something that he's really focusing on right now. I
agree with that, Lisa. The other powerful thing I wanted to share with you was at our 10th conference, because it was like, you know, I've written it all down in a book, not because I'm a writer, but because God asked me to. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we had a different theme. We had a different theme every year. And Andrew and I always knew that the men needed to apologize to the women.
Wow.
But we couldn't set that up, you know, because Andrew mentioned it to them one time and they just, no, we don't need to do that. No, there's no need for that. But we knew it needed to happen. And so at our 10th conference, we were really praying. By that time, Andrew we were back in Australia and I was traveling over, and Andrew was too sick to travel with me. But he was praying, and I just had a feeling that it was going to happen at the 10th conference. And it just so happened that I flew into Zagreb. A pastor picked me up and drove me down to the where we were having the conference. And he said, you know, he said, I think God's doing something. I think he's doing something. He said, it seems that a lot of pastors are driving the women to the conference this year. So there just happened to be, Lisa, as we know, it's all God. There were 7 pastors there.
Wow.
And they said to me, when we got there, Oliver, his name is, he said, Greta, can we have a meeting with you? We just need a half an hour with you. And they said to me, would you trust us to have half an hour in tonight's session? This was Saturday. And I said, yes, of course. And I didn't really know what they were going to do. But anyway, after worship, I introduced these 7 men, and and I'll probably cry when I tell you this because it was so powerful. It was so impacting. One after the other, they took the microphone and they asked for forgiveness on behalf of all the men that had hurt them and raped them and, used them and abused them over the years. And they repented as if they were the ones doing it. They didn't say all those men back then. They did it as if they were the ones doing it. And when the second guy got the microphone, he went and walked among the women and looked them in the eyes, asked for forgiveness, and again, the Holy Spirit just took over. Women were weeping and the men were praying over them. And and from that time on, they've been unstoppable, these women. They've been set free. And God showed me right at the beginning when I started the conferences that because the women of Eastern Europe, they're like the second-class citizens of Europe. And God showed me that he was going to turn that around. From them being second-class citizens, they were going to become leaders to the women in Europe. And that's happened. Because at our conferences now we get, before COVID I'm talking about, we haven't had one since COVID, but we would have 16 nations, different nations at the conference somewhere in Eastern Europe. So God has done an absolutely, phenomenal.
Oh, Greta, I'm finding it really hard to capture my thoughts because it's so beautiful. And again, it comes back to that saying yes to God, to something that you didn't even know how to do in the moment. And isn't that like him, to choose us, to say yes to him, to the impossible, but he makes it possible. And it's also to bless us. Like, I know that it would have been really hard setting that up, but how deeply blessed have you been from that?
It's changed me. It's completely changed me. My faith has grown because we've seen miracles, signs and wonders in so many places. After a few years, Macedonia is incredibly poor, and so there's a lot of Roma people there.
Okay.
A lot of them don't even have any ID, so they can't travel, and they've got no money anyway. So we started going to them. Andrew and I would go to the women in this particular village, and nobody would come with me to begin with, so Andrew came with me, so that we did a conference there. And we saw some amazing things happen. There was a woman who came and she was crying and she said, I need to give you a gift. I need to give you a gift. And she had wrapped up a tube of half-used toothpaste in newspaper because she had nothing else to give, but their culture is very much to give a gift when guests come. Andrew gave her a small amount of money, and the next year, when we went back over there, with the money that he gave her, she had bought a piglet. She grew the piglet up. She sold it when it was grown up, and from that she bought chickens.
Wow.
So she was selling eggs, supporting her family. That's just one of the miracles. Anyway, that ministry grew. So we had our main big conference, later on, I got the team to come with me to Macedonia.
Mm-hmm.
And I had one lady who was working with the children, and she really put a beautiful program together for the children. And this one year, because I don't live near a beach, and so she had brought sand, buckets and spades, and she was teaching them. And I remember so clearly at lunchtime, I saw her running towards me and she's going, Greta, 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 I had 25 kids and I only had 20 buckets and 20 spades, but everybody got a bucket and everybody got a spade. So God multiplied the buckets.
That's amazing.
Isn't it?
Oh,
I mean, I could tell you so many stories, but I don't.
I would love to, because you and I have spoken previously at other gatherings, and I remember it was a couple of years ago. It was probably just before COVID, and you shared with me how bold and fearless you feel overseas and speaking and using your voice, but when it comes to Australia, you really struggled to, or you found it harder to be bold and to use your voice. But I've seen you since then very much using your voice in Australia, and you've actually expanded what you're doing to online. But can you share a little bit behind that story?
Well, it was interesting. It was actually, I can describe it this way, that when Andrew and I moved back to Australia, and we moved back because of his health, I found it very intimidated in Australia. And I used to say to my friends, it's like when I go overseas that I walk out of this little shy body and walk into this amazing body that and do amazing things overseas. But I didn't feel that way when I first got here. But you know, when I went to a retreat where Sheena Ryan had a word over me, and I thought her word was really crazy at the time. She said, social media. She said, social media, you're going to be doing something on social media. Now, I couldn't do social media. I didn't really even know what social media was. But anyway, 2020, we got COVID. And so we couldn't go over to the conference. And so at a prayer meeting, the Lord showed us this picture of starting a social media page. Simone Leslie and I, Daughters of the King Global. And, you know, the first time that Simone came around to my place and she said, we're going to do a live, we're going to introduce this thing, I nearly freaked out. I almost freaked out. Anyway, we did it. And so we started this social page, and I was walking around my house one day praying when the Lord said to me, you need to pray every night live on Daughters of the King Facebook page. You need to declare my sovereignty, and you need to pray for lost family members.
Wow.
So I've never done anything like that. And if you could have seen me the first time, I sat there and I almost pushed the button, and then I would and then I would almost do it again. And then I just said to myself, oh, shut up, Greta, and get over yourself and just do it. So I did. And if you can go back and watch that first one, it probably wasn't very good. It was probably very amateurish, but since then I have got over myself, and it means you've just got to, it's not about me. That was the thing that helped me. It's not about me. It's not about how you look. It's not about whether your makeup is on straight. It's about Jesus. And it's about, and you know, so now we're almost into, well, we are into our third year of praying live 6 nights a week now. And we declare God's sovereignty. We pray for our unsaved loved ones. We pray against abortion, and we pray for the pro-life centres and leaders, and we always have communion. And you know, we're in over 80 nations now, so COVID didn't stop what God wanted to do.
No, it certainly did not. Greta, so it's called Daughters of the King. How can people, because I'm sure people at the moment who are listening in are like, actually, I want to join in on that. I want to be a part of the prayer every now and again. How can they find you and be a part of what you're doing?
Well, they can go on to the Daughters of the King Global Facebook page and ask to join.
Perfect.
And if that doesn't work for them, they can message me. I'm on Messenger. They can message me, and I'll invite them. If I can find them on Messenger, I can then invite them. But you know, I want to read to you what I wrote in the beginning of my book, because I think that can encourage anybody out there. Because when God whispered to me, I so shy. I used to be afraid of my own shadow. And what God has done is phenomenal. So I'll just read you what's in the front of my book. And this can apply to anybody who hears from God, if they will just take that step, just step off the cliff, just step out of the boat, start to walk on water. Daughters of the King, A Whisper from Heaven is a book about what God can accomplish through an ordinary person without any qualifications, only a willingness to obey the leading of his Spirit. It is the true story of how a whisper can become a movement that gave women their dignity back in a society where they have been oppressed for many generations. Many times throughout this book, you'll read about how God made the impossible possible. A Whisper from Heaven started as a seed, and that seed over the period of 1 decade produced more fruit than I could have ever imagined. So and the only reason I wrote that book is because somebody from over there wrote to me and said, Greta, you need to write down the story, because the generations that are coming up behind them, they don't know how the whole thing started. And it really was the first thing for women in that part of the world. But we can do the same thing over here. If God whispers something to us, just step out of the boat, because he always equips. He always equips us if he calls us.
He absolutely does. Do you have the book there that you can hold up and show us?
I do. Can you see it?
Does it say Daughters of the King?
Yeah, it just says Daughters of the King, A Whisper from Heaven.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. And Greta, just how old were you when he whispered that to you?
How old was I? Well, if Andrew was 71, I'm 12 years younger than him. 59, I think I was. Yes, 59. The second year in Croatia, I had my 60th birthday.
And that's when God really began the movement in your 60s, when you were over there. Yes. And I highlight that because I hear often women feel like they've wasted time or they've missed out. They're too old to start something. And I just love that God began this incredible movement in Europe through you. And like you said, you're in your 60s, and there's so much more to come yet.
You know, Lisa, age is mind over matter, and if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. That's true, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm only old on the outside. I'm not old on the inside.
Oh, I think you look fabulous inside and out. Greta, thank you so much for sharing your story, for your time. You have deeply blessed me, but I know that there'll be many touched by your story of reconciliation, of saying yes to the impossible, and just what God can do from saying yes. You're so inspiring, and thank you,
Lisa. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Oh, an absolute pleasure. Well, join us next time and for next week. And also we do have a conference that God told me to start. And so I've got a conference in October, and we've still got a few spots left for that. And you're welcome to come. Just hop on arisesanctuary.com.au and you'll find the conference information there as well. Okay, until next week. Thanks for joining me on Brave with Lisa. I hope that it has inspired or impacted you in a small or large way. Feel free to comment, to subscribe, and share with some friends. And please join us next week on another conversation we will have here on this channel on Brave with Lisa.